Well, good morning and welcome to our very first virtual meeting. We've worked very hard on this. Ricky has worked very, very hard on the technical because, believe me, her partner is no help at all when it comes to technology. So I feel for all of you in that area as well. But we've managed to pull it together, I hope, and we're going to try to do the best we can for you today. The first topic that we're going to talk about are the emergency plans. There's been a lot of catchphrases that have gone out in the last couple of months. I'm sure you've heard all of them. The one I kind of liked was plan for the worst and hope for the best, because it is optimistic and realistic at the same time, which is, I think, something that we all need to be. You will note, Ricky and I measured this out. We are 6 feet apart. We did come to the office to do this because we didn't want to lose any connectivity on our home internet, which, you know, sometimes is a little iffy. But we are following social distancing. We have masks, we have hand sanitizer, and we're doing our best to keep ourselves safe. And doing it this will keep you safe because you're not exposed to any of us as well. So what we found in the last couple of months is that emergency plans are absolutely necessary. And what we've also, I think, learned is that planning beforehand has really helped. The best time to plan is before you run face into this. We were very lucky at State Board of Accounts because Paul did a lot of early planning on this, had a lot of things in place, and so our transition went very smoothly. I know I have talked to some counties where the planning wasn't quite as set up as it could be, and so there was a lot of, what do we do now? Questions. And so we can't emphasize enough, even though we are still in this emergency, but as we go forward, to get emergency plans in place, now that you've kind of been through this, you have a good idea of what is needed. So start, jotting those thoughts down and working on that.
Paul would like Wes to say something.
Huh?
Paul would like Wes to say something.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
We're gonna switch gears here.
Wes, are you there?
Great. Okay. Thank you for checking. Have a good day.
Oh,
No, to mute her.
I don't know who that is. What?
Do you want me to do it?
Wes, do you want to say something?
Wes is muted. Now he's unmuted.
Or is it?
There he goes.
There we go. We know you're speaking a little bit later, but we didn't know if you wanted to say a few words here.
No. Later's fine. I'm watching and listening.
Okay, well, I just thought you might want to tell him hi.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good to see you. There we go.
Your hair looks nice, Wes.
Well, thank you.
I think you need to make a hair appointment.
Well, the Grecian's not working for me right now, is it? So, ladies, thank you for putting this on. I look forward to participating. We'll speak later on this afternoon, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Good morning. Oh, yeah.
Cool.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
There you go.
You may want to mute Julie and the others too. Oh.
Okay, I think we're back on track. We did send out a memo that we're going to be going over this morning about emergency plans. Obviously, the bulk of it often falls on your commissioners because they need to make county-wide plans, but there are plans that you need to make for your individual office as well. So we'll be going over these in not only here, but with training with other officials. And so, again, we want you to focus on the things that you can do, getting your plan set up, changing your plans as needed, and we have asked, I don't know where that question is, we did ask for templates. I know it's going to sound really bad because you know how I feel about internal controls, but it's kind of like internal controls. They're going to be somewhat unique to your office because it's your resources, your size, what you have available, and you're going to have to gear around that. So it's hard to set up a plan that's going to fit for everyone. But what we presented was, and what we're going to go over, are considerations that you might have in setting your plans up. So the importance of the plan is that there is a continuity of essential operations. There are many kinds of threat environments. we've had them in the past, natural disasters, floods, tornadoes. We recently have had a whole bunch of, unfortunately, cyber attacks coming along. The COVID-19 pandemic, the health pandemic, is really a threat we have not had to deal with at this level ever before. And so that's added additional stress, obviously you know that, additional stress on how to keep your county going, keep your offices going. And what we're thinking is that if you set up these emergency plans, especially if you're addressing COVID-19, that a lot of the others, you can keep this emergency plan going and make adjustments and have it available when other disasters or other threat environments occur. So for any threat, we know that government services are essential. However, not all of the functions of the government are critical, and services can be prioritized, and some may be put off. It isn't really practical to shut down operations. I know in the beginning some counties, commissioners felt that would just shut it down and wait it out, but this isn't a kind of wait it out kind of emergency. It's not a single event that you're going to recover from, like a tornado or a flood. This is going to take months, if not a year, before we even have a vaccine. We don't know when it's going to reoccur, so we always have to bear in mind that that threat is still out there. As auditors, you know that you perform a lot of the essential services that keep your county going. You do payroll, you do settlement, you do claims processing, for purchasing all of these, even the COVID-19 masks and gloves and things that were needed to deal with that. So your office is definitely essential. So what we want you to look at are the critical services that you have in your office, and then to kind of prioritize those, the ones that definitely have to be done, the ones that maybe can wait a little longer. It's a lot easier when the pandemic hit. For a lot of us, it was just, we were in crisis mode at that point. We were responding to a crisis. We were dealing with it moment by moment. And that's where the plan can really help, that you have something outlined to follow so that you're not trying to make it up as you're dealing with everything else that's going wrong. So for counties, the commissioners, again, are going to be very important in this, and I know you work closely with them for making countywide plans. They are coordinating a lot of things within the county from the ones I have witnessed. As far as your health department has become very prominent. Suddenly they're doing weekly news briefs and letting you know what's going on in the county. Your EMS services, your frontline people, all of those have to be coordinated, and that really, again, is going to fall on the commissioners, but I know in a lot of situations you work very closely with them on that. So within your office, again, we talked about it. Payroll is very important. You need to get that done, so that's not something you can put off. Essential claims that need to be done right away, that need to be paid. Your tax billing and settlement processes need to have some continuity, although they're going to change because of the in-person, because of the courthouses shutting down and not having the in-person. But all of those need to be continued. We did put out several memos and a couple of state directives. Those are all available on our website on the home page. So you have one location, you go back. So we sent them out. I mean, you may have gotten more than one copy of them because we tried to make sure they got to everybody. So we sent them out to all the email addresses we had, and we used your association to send them out as well. And so we apologize if you got it more than once, but we felt that was better than not getting it all. But if you can't locate it, they are all on that website, so be sure and use that as a resource. The FEMA has a website, and they have some very good resources on that. They do have, and we have a link here within our memo, a place to go for exactly what we're talking about, the continuity of services and emergency response plans. They have a circular, templates, examples of that. A lot of it, again, is geared for countywide, but I think if you look at it, you can pull some of those things out that can help your office specifically. On the FEMA website, they talk about the purpose of the emergency plan, and again, is to maintain the continuity of government, provide visible leadership, support the defense of the United States, maintain and foster effective relationships with neighbors and partners, maintain law and order, provide emergency services, maintain economic stability, and provide basic essential services. And that's what our counties have been doing throughout this. And so they are to be commended for the work that you all have done on that. So it gives 3 steps within that. The first step is to identify the essential functions. We talked about that a little bit. Also identify mitigation options. Are there, and which we've had to do here, are there alternative locations that you can work? If you have to limit the number of people in the courthouse, can people be able to work from home? Is there another office they can use so that you can minimize the contact, keep the social distancing down? Telework. Again, you had to be accessible to your public, but you had to do it in a way that was safe for everyone. So some counties did it by appointment, some just did periods of time when no one was coming in, but those are all decisions that have to be made. And the third thing is to identify some key elements such as the orders of succession. And we'll be going over that in a little bit. I also put on, this is just for your reference, these are direct links to the memos that we're going over today, and to also our information technology manual, which does have some disaster recovery plans specifically for IT, but a lot of times we forget that manual's there, and it does have a lot of good information in it, so I put that link up there for you. So we issued a memo on April 3rd, and again, it's still available on the homepage of our website. In the following slides, what we're going to do is discuss the information in that and try to give a little more detail on what our thought processes were to try to help clarify and explain those the suggestions that we had in that. The first on there was the order of succession. And we told you that in the event that the unit fiscal officer is temporarily unable to perform duties, consider designating individuals who will fill in for the fiscal officer in order of succession. We had a lot of questions about that. What do you mean? You know, I have a chief deputy. I don't need anything beyond that. But what we've learned with this COVID-19 is that it can take out an entire office at one time. If someone in the auditor's office is positive, then I'll get in quarantine for a while. And if you're not able to telework or to meet those essential needs, you need somebody that's able to do that. You found the same thing if I've heard of the treasurer's office, where the treasurer has been quarantined or been ill, and so that you need someone to keep those operations going so that you can keep operating as a county. So you need to work out now who you can have. Obviously, you're going to have your order of succession within your county office. If you're not able to, your chief deputy and other deputies that can do that. But in the event that if no one in your office is able to fulfill that position, if there's someone outside of your office that might be able to step in and do that, it might be a member of your governing body. It might be another, an employee in another office that maybe used to work in your office and has some knowledge of that. So you need to be thinking about that and deciding, again, hope for the best, plan for the worst. If it gets to that level, that person is available so that the essential services continue. That person needs to know that they're in your order of succession. They shouldn't find out the first day you're sick that all of a sudden they have responsibility, so you need to keep them in the know, make sure that they're willing to do that. You're going to have to take measures to make sure that they can access information that they need to get this, to fulfill those duties. And it says they have the authority to do that. So we ask that you work with your attorney and looking at some sort of a delegation memo or letter that sets out who's going to take that authority. And so again, you got to work with your unit attorney, make sure that they would have the authority to step in and take over some of the responsibilities, especially if you're talking about signing checks or accessing bank accounts. And please remember that your designated person should still be either another elected officer or an employee of the county. Again, it could be a member of your governing boards or another employee for another office. You're not going to want to just pick someone randomly to come in and do this. So make sure you're really working through. This person is acting on your behalf during this time, and so you want to make sure it's someone you trust and someone that's going to do the best job possible with the available resources that they have. Again, work with your attorney on that delegation of authority so that it will become operative at the point that it's needed, but not before, okay? It's a big deal. You know it's a big deal. When you turn your office over to your first deputy, you're putting a lot of trust in that person to run that office when you're not there. And you're doing the same thing during a very critical time when you're turning that authority over to another person to take care of those essential functions while you're not able to perform them. You want to make sure that you've addressed all risks with that. You want to make sure that, that your attorney has worked with that and they have the delegation that they need to perform those services. They need to be available to the people who need them. If it's a letter that allows them to access your IT or a bank or something, that has to be available to them at the time that they need it, but you do not want that authority delegated to them prior to that time. So that's why you want to make sure that you tightened all of that up. As we work through the memos, please remember it was written for all of our local units, not just county or just specifically the auditor's office. So when we talk about things to access to bank accounts, that's really not as much an issue for your office directly. However, you work with the treasurer to get those claims and those checks paid out, so you do have an indirect interest in making sure that those bank accounts are accessible should something happen with the treasurer's office. So when we talk about bank accounts, again, this would be more the treasurer, is that you provide access at the point it is needed, not before, so that your delegated or designated individual has access to the bank account if it's necessary for checks to be paid out. Since all checks are countersigned by you, if it's an actual check, then you also need to make sure if you're the one that's ill that the access to that signature or a delegated authority has the right to sign. Again, you're going to have to work with your banks on that to make sure that signature will be accepted during that time. For the officers, treasurers, and again, this will affect offices that have their own bank account, like recorders or clerks or sheriffs. They also will need to discuss with their banking representatives to determine what requirements are needed. As I said, what signatures will be recognized. So make sure that you've had those discussions beforehand. We have been asked the question about the auditor and the treasurer being each other's delegated successor. We do not recommend that because you need to keep the segregation of duties in place as much as possible. If there is no other, in the event there is no one else to actually take on the responsibilities, you would need to make sure that you have compensating controls in place if you have one person that's handling all of that to make sure that someone else is reviewing or overseeing or authorizing, so that it's not just one person having access from the process beginning to end as far as writing the claims, issuing the checks. And I know right now we're starting to come out of it, but we are in crisis. So it's easy in crisis to lose sight of the long-term picture. We need to get this done this minute. We're not going to worry about 2 months from now. But the long-term picture needs to be in the back of your mind. There are changes that need to be addressed to your internal controls to make you more efficient, maybe streamline some processes during this because your resources are limited. But the rules don't go out the window. You still need to make sure there are controls in place to make sure that during this time, the transactions that are done are authorized and appropriate. So in order for your delegated successor to actually succeed, they must have information and access to resources that they probably, unless it is a deputy in your department, they don't normally have. So this list is the contact information for you to consider. Think about what would be needed for your office. I realized when I found out we were going to work remotely that I took home everything I would need for my office to work from home. I did not. I found several things that I wish I had grabbed. It's going to be a lot more difficult for your delegated person who may not even know what information they need in the first place to make sure they have access to everything. So if you can provide this information maybe in a quote-unquote manual of sorts, whether it's hard copy or electronic, so that your successor has a good idea of what you need. And again, if you've prioritized what needs to be done, they have an idea of what they need to tackle first. And that information has got to be accessible to them. They may not have access to your office. The courthouse may be closed and they may not be able to get in. So if it's in electronic or some way that you can get it to them, please, bear that in mind when you're working out your emergency plans, is that you may need to get that information to them beforehand. Contact information for your governing body. That seems pretty straightforward. A lot of websites have contact information for commissioners and council. But if you already have that set up in a form, in a spreadsheet or a document in your manual that you set up, it's just a lot easier to have it ready for them. There also might be cell phones or other contact information that's not available public that might help them during this time. Okay. The next on there is Ricky and I, Board of Accounts. Make sure that the person that is your designated individual knows how to contact the State Board of Accounts. Call Ricky and I, email us. The website has a whole lot of information, a lot of good information, but if they're just trying to figure out how to keep going, they don't have time to research all of that. We would be happy to talk to them. We have talked to people that have been filling in to try and help with procedures, with accounting issues, with trying to make sure that everything goes forward smoothly. So be sure and include us on that. Okay, again, we talked about earlier, make sure that they have information to contact your banking representative when they're taking over that authority for signing checks, that everything is going to go smoothly for that. Make sure your successor has the ability to contact your software vendor because they're going to need access to that software. They're going to need a user ID and a password. They don't need it before they take that position unless they're a deputy, but if they're outside your office, but they will need it at the point that they're taking over for you. So make sure they have how to contact that software vendor and get help with any software issues. Also, in the same vein, make sure they have the ability to contact your IT person if you have one. They can assist them in establishing or activating a user ID or password for software, for email, for whatever it is they need to do to perform those essential functions. If you have a neighboring county official that you work well with, that can assist your successor with the duties of the job or familiarity with the software, provide that contact information. Make sure that that neighboring auditor knows that you are providing that information, but give them as a resource because they're in the job. They know what's to be done. They're going to be an invaluable resource. By the same token, make sure they know about your association and how to contact members there for assistance, how to contact AIC, and they can provide assistance during this time as well. All of that information should be written down. It's just much easier if you've got it all written down beforehand, that they can just contact and reach out and not have to look for that. Okay? And if there's anyone else you can think of that would be able to provide a valuable resource for the person that you've designated, be sure to provide their contact information as well. Each office may be very similar to the same office in other counties. All of the auditor's offices operate somewhat the same, but they are also unique in what resources they have, what software they use, what banks they use. So you need to make sure that you have this information available. In a purely selfless way, it's allowing your county to continue those essential governmental services during this crisis time, which is a rock for your citizens as well. And in a purely selfish way, the smoother it goes when you're not able to do it, the easier it's going to be when you get back to pick up those reins and go forward. Now, with information technology, having access to the software won't be much help if the person doesn't know how to use it. So if there are manuals or written instructions for performing financial record keeping that is maintained on the software, Make sure your successor has access to this, and this is just a very second-time subtle plug. If you have written policies and procedures in your internal controls, this would be absolutely fantastic to have those available in your office for your successor. Backups have become much more critical and kind of more critical scrutiny with the event of cyber attacks in the last few years. Backups should be maintained on a daily basis. They should be separated from your main server or storage. If the backups are part of the server, the cyber attack will often take them out as well. At the risk of aging myself, I remember when backups used to be stored on diskettes, CDs, and tapes, and I'm sure those don't exist anymore. But you may be using an external memory now, isolated server, or a safe to cloud. With these backups, when the ransomware encrypts your financial records, those records can be restored up to the time of the last backup. If this is done daily, only the day's transactions that were posted prior to the attack would need to be reloaded onto the software. The longer the time since that last backup, the more work to update those files until, if it's too much time has passed, it becomes impossible to restore your records, and you may have no choice but to pay a ransom and hope you get your records back. So think about your backups if you haven't already, and ensure that they are, again, being done daily and they are in a safe place. You should also maintain a backup in a separate location from the main server. In the event that instead of like a pandemic, there might be a flood or a tornado or something that might take out your courthouse. So you have a secondary location that those records are stored that you can get to. Sometimes you can work out on contracts with your vendors for them to hold your backup, and that's purely your decision, but make sure that you have a plan in place. Another point with your backups is to test them to make sure they exist and that they are accessible. You don't want to find out in the middle of the emergency that you cannot access those records. So periodically testing them and making sure they're working is a very, very good idea. You need to make your plan known. For the same reason that you want your designated person to know who to contact, you also want those contacts to know who that designated person is. The first time your IT person learns that there is a designated successor should not be from the initial contact of that designated successor. They need to know this person is legitimate, they have a delegation of authority, and they are authorized to have access to software, to banks, to vendors. So make sure that the plan is known. So you can give it to your governing board, you can give it to your county attorney, your banking representative, your software vendor. Make sure that that plan is out there. As we discussed earlier, it's important to determine essential duties for those that can be deferred to a later date. Further, those duties should be prioritized. The priorities would guide your own work during the emergency when you are operating under restrictions due to the emergency. But, for example, the courthouse may be closed, or no one's allowed in, or you have reduced staffing. Things are not going to run as efficiently during the emergency, even if everything else is in place. So having a priority of what the most critical tasks are and being able to do those in that order will help. And then if you are unable to perform your duties for any reason, your designated person will be even less efficient than you are. And so you have to bear in mind it's a good idea to make sure they know what are the most critical tasks that need to be done. Payroll is always a highly critical case. You need your employees to get paid. They need to be paid timely. It's also one of the more complicated processes. So that should be a high priority on your list. There are other things. If you can have something in writing for the payroll process, if your payroll person can even work on that now, that lists the tasks that they do when they perform payroll, so they have kind of a checklist to follow, that is really, really helpful. I have done an audit before where the payroll person was gone. The other people were able to get payroll out, but they forgot to remit the federal and state withholdings, and they had a lot of penalties with that. The unit was able to get those penalties removed, but if they had that checklist and had done that last step, they could have avoided all that. Some claims still need to be paid. Obviously, your debt payments need to be made. So procedures need to be developed to process those claims during the emergency. As we saw with COVID-19, the inability to hold public meetings affected the ability to follow your normal claims process. The state examiner issued a directive 2020-1, which provided guidance on approval of claims that helped, gave guidance for your governing bodies to set up a more streamlined process during the emergency itself, allowed the commissioners to designate one of its members to approve claims for payment in advance of board approval. Those claims would still need to be presented at the first meeting after the public health emergency has ended, but it does allow them to go forward even when public meetings are not being held. The directive also provided guidance for timely deposits, which the statute requires to be made daily, allowing them to be made, if a policy was established, to be made twice a week. It's important to determine what tasks can be postponed so you can free up your time to focus on the essential tasks that need to be completed. You do have to track those tasks so that they can be completed and they're not forgotten. And if that's in your plan and you have your list of priorities, that will help you track those. We've learned that business as normal is nowhere near normal during an emergency. If you have an established emergency plan, it will help you organize and provide those necessary services. Remote working, furloughed employees, closed offices, even damaged offices or records will require you to reevaluate your internal control. It is best that they are in writing, another hint. Even during an emergency, those controls don't just disappear. However, they may need to be modified due to changed circumstance. As much as possible, there continues to be a need for segregation of duties. One person should not be able to control all parts of receiving and dispersing process. Working remotely obviously has all of its own challenges. You need to know what equipment will be needed, what can be done remotely, what will need to be done in the office. If staffing at the office is to be limited due to health concerns, what procedures will be followed to protect the health of the employees, such as alternating days, if I can talk, to come into the office, so the number of employees on any given day is limited. Having the necessary equipment and structure to support that work remotely will be extremely beneficial. We did have a question that asked, what can we do to safely work remotely in regard to financial software, licensing agreements for programs such as Harris, need to be transferable to laptops in public situations? Does the state have a preference? This is something you're going to have to work out with your software vendor as far as the license and how you're going to handle that, for you to be able to explain what you need to do and for them to be able to explain what needs to be done in order for those licenses to be transferred. We did discuss cyber attacks a little bit. What is really unfair to me is that during an emergency such as COVID, which we were just trying to get by day to day, those cyber attacks increase. They know everyone is stressed out, they're working in an unfamiliar environment, they're more likely to fall for those phishing attacks or click on a suspect link due to the stress of the situation, an action that they would not maybe have done in the normal course of business. So remind your staff as part of your emergency plan to be very diligent in looking at where are these emails coming from. Obviously, it's not business as usual, but where are these emails coming from? What are these links? What am I actually answering? They need to be even more diligent than they were before. How am I in time? 4 minutes. We had another memo issued on March 16th, and I put the information in here. Some of it is a repeat or some of the same information, so be sure and look at that memo. It did talk about things to do, especially when you have furloughed employees or you have remote working employees, how you're going to track that, how you're going to do social distancing if you're having meetings, whether it's done virtually, by phone. Again, a lot of that needs to be thought out in advance to try to make sure you have that. You need to pay attention to how employees will check in with you. How do you know they're working? Do you have an electronic time card system that they can access? Is there another way that you're going to have to do that? What security issues do you have? What documents can leave the office? What need to absolutely stay in the office? And there are working remotely, how are they connecting? How secure is that? We had a thing come out when we first started working remotely that our Wi-Fi, which I had not thought about, my Wi-Fi password may not be as secure as what I need since I'm using my home Wi-Fi. So those kinds of things need to be considered. Again, look at that as you're making note of things that didn't work for you so well this time, making notes to how to improve that in the future. Because I hate to say it, but there will probably be another emergency in the future at some point that you're going to have to deal with. That's a reality of life. So if you can improve on them now, going forward, it will be very helpful. You also have to do your planning considerations for returning to work. How are you going to do operations? Who's going to come in? Are you going to do it in shifts? Again, how are you going to communicate with employees and train on the new procedures? Do they need to wear a mask? How are you going to separate it? Are there going to be shields? Are there going to be gloves? Everything that's involved in that all have to be thought out, and those things need to be provided. We did have a question about handling the public coming back to the courthouse. Do we supply them with a mask? Do we put social distancing circles on the floor? Do we make them use hand sanitizer when they come in before they leave? Who's going to monitor that? I would suggest that you highly recommend they do that. Whether you can enforce that or not, I don't know. I think grocery stores and other frontline places would probably tell you that if they're coming in with a chip on their shoulder, you may not be able to get them to wear that mask or use the hand sanitizer, but you can certainly have it available for your employees, have those screens up that protect them as well. We issued a memo on April 29th about the COVID-19 grants. We did let you know about accounting for those. There are grants coming from a lot of locations. They're all under the CARES Act, but they may be coming through CDBG grants, through Oprah. They might be FAA grants for your airports. There was a CARES Provider Relief Grant that came directly to vendors that had like ambulance services or providing medical care. All of that needs to be tracked. I don't know if all of you remember when we had ARA funds, but the government was like, when we did those federal audits, we had to track every penny. So make sure you are tracking these when they come in. Set up individual funds for each type of grant. If you have any questions at all about this, be sure to contact Rick and I. We'd be glad to help you with those. We do list in that memo that the political subdivisions are allowed to waive appropriation procedures, so we will not take audit exception if you use those COVID-19 funds during this emergency without an appropriation. And then the last thing I want to touch on, before I may be out of time, recently the state has issued their coronavirus relief funds. The AIC had a webinar on Monday, an excellent webinar on Monday. It's still on YouTube. You can go watch it, and they give you a lot of valuable information about this. There were memos that were sent out to your county commissioners. To participate in the program, the commissioners must sign and return the Coronavirus Relief Fund Acceptance Certification Form. They've already allocated each county what their amount is, and that spreadsheet is on that website as well, on the IFA website as well, to tell you what your county is eligible to receive. These are for COVID-19 related expenses. These are that are non-budgeted payroll, cleaning or disinfecting supplies, medical supplies, personal protection equipment, and testing is what they're mainly for. It is a reimbursement grant. They're reimbursing expenses you already have, so you should have been tracking them, hopefully, in whatever fund they were dispersed from, so that you will have the claims and you can submit a request for those reimbursement services. The commissioners do need to sign the acceptance certification in order for you to receive those, and then you will submit the reimbursement request form and attach documentation for expenses. As they said in the AIC, it's a good idea to keep your PPE and those supplies in one and as one request so that you're categorizing them by type. Some of the more routine ones like PPE and disinfecting supplies are more likely to go through quicker, and if they hold on to the others, it won't hold up your whole reimbursement. Those funds need to be deposited into a grant fund, so we can track that, we can report it, we can include it on the SEPA. This is federal money, so it is a federal grant, it does need to be reported. And the IFA website has a lot of really good information. If you go on to, I put the link on here, if you go on the left-hand side, go down, there is a section for the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and there's, all of this information is right in there.
Oh, we're going to.
Okay. So that is everything that I have on emergency plans, which obviously does not cover everything that you probably need to know, but hopefully it gives you some ideas. Again, if you want to call us and brainstorm, we're always happy to do that.
And